Greetings all, Ferrari Man 601 here. In the last week, iRacing has gotten another new update, and with it come a couple of new race cars for our driving pleasure. The one that probably was the most anticipated by the vast majority of people is the brand new Corvette C8.R GTE. The Chevrolet Corvette, well, it is a legend. It is the American sports car, and now, finally, after 60-plus years in production, it's a mid-engine car with its sights set squarely on the likes of Ferrari and McLaren in terms of competing with those marques' road cars. However, racing is also very much a part of the Corvette heritage, and the C8.R GTE, as we see it here in iRacing, well, it's got all the makings to be one of the most legendary tin-top endurance sports cars in all of endurance racing history. Already in 2020, it has won 4 out of the only 6 races that it has started, which really means to me that it is well on its way of becoming a legend in its own time. Let's take a look at what iRacing have given us here with the Corvette C8.R GTE. Yeah, it's going to be a fun one. Let's get started. Since its introduction in 1953, the Chevrolet Corvette has been cemented in its reputation and status as America's sports car. Initially introduced as the American answer to cars like the Jaguar XK120 and the assorted MGs and Triumphs of the world, the Corvette was not, in its infancy, a really exciting car. It had a straight 6 engine out of a truck. However, as the car has evolved and now has reached its 8th generation, the Corvette became a true sports car. In the 1960s in particular, it really got a boost in its performance with the introduction of V8 engines, and through the 1960s and early 70s, it really cemented its reputation as a muscle car. But in its later iterations, from the 4th generation on, really, it became a proper sports car, not only focused on going fast in a straight line with all-out horsepower, but through each iteration, beginning with the C4 generation, I would say, in the mid-1980s, and now up through the present day with the C8 in 2020, the Corvette has become a car not just focused on going fast in straight lines, but going fast around corners as well. And of course, as a race car, as we see it here, the Corvette has really driven home that reputation of being a premier level endurance sports car. And, well, the C8R, as we see it here in its GTE spec in iRacing, is no exception to that. The Corvette C8 as a road car, introduced in February 2020 when it entered production at the Bowling Green, Kentucky assembly plant, the only place where Corvettes are built. Began production in February of this year, and of course it remains in production today. The real story about the C8 Corvette, though, is it is a mid-engined sports car from General Motors and, of course, from the United States. America, not really known for building mid-engine sports cars, and in terms of General Motors, the Corvette C8 is the first production mid-engine car that General Motors have made in about 40 years. The last production mid-engine car from General Motors, you got to go back all the way to 1984 and the Pontiac Fiero. That was the last time that General Motors put a mid-engine car into production, and of course the Pontiac Fiero, for better or worse, it was absolutely noble in its intention, but absolutely flawed in its execution. General Motors, of course, have learned all of the lessons from the Fiero, and they have applied them to great effect in the C8 Corvette. For the first time ever, the Corvette is now a mid-engine sports car with performance figures that are squarely aimed at the McLarens and Ferraris of the world. So again, General Motors and America going after the premier manufacturers in Europe with this effort, just as they attempted to do all the way back in the 50s with the first Corvette. And so far, it has absolutely turned out wonderfully for them, at least in the racing side of the world. In the road car specification of the C8 Corvette, right now we've only really got one version of the road car, but I am absolutely certain that that is going to change as time progresses. Mid-engine, of course, the engine in the road car is a 6.2-liter LT2 V8, normally aspirated at 90 degrees. And that engine is producing about 495 to 505-ish horsepower, depending on which figures you're apt to believe. They officially rated at 495 horsepower. However, also for the first time, in addition to being mid-engine, the Corvette has a semi-automatic gearbox in the road car version. It's not really a semi-automatic per se, as in there is no driver-actuated clutch, but it is a dual-clutch 8-speed gearbox by Tremec, and that's the first dual-clutch gearbox in the Corvette. It's the first 8-speed gearbox in the Corvette, and it's the first time ever that the Corvette has not been offered with a manual gearbox in its road car variant. Again, that may change in the future depending on what they do with special editions and developments of the car, but for now, the Corvette is a paddle shift only car. It's been a little bit controversial, shall we say, in terms of what the enthusiasts think about this. I, for one, do believe that the Corvette should at least be offered with a manual gearbox, but whatever. Signs of the times per se. On the racing side of the world, though, road cars, believe it or not, are a whole lot less restricted in terms of the things that you could do with them than their racing counterparts. Despite the race cars being, of course, all-out designed to go as fast as possible around a circuit, they do have to comply with all sorts of technical regulations and safety regulations depending on where they're racing, in which series they're racing, and for what purpose they are racing. So, the road car version of the Corvette probably has a little bit more horsepower than the GTE variant C8R that we see here. Slightly different engine in this version of the car as well. The race car features, as we see it here, the LT 5.5 engine from General Motors. It's a 5.5-liter, normally aspirated V8 at 90 degrees. Of course, still mounted midships there behind the cabin area, and it is linked up to not an 8-speed, but a 6-speed proper semi-automatic gearbox in this car. Paddle actuated pneumatically, of course. The engine is rated at 500 horsepower at 7,400 RPM, although the red line in this car, the functional red line is basically 6,750. It will rev to 7,000, but you don't hit 7,400 in this car, at least not as we see it here in iRacing. However, it is an absolutely wonderful race car. Of course, it made its debut in 2020, as did the road car, but even though its first season of competition is not anywhere near complete yet, we see an absolutely fantastic competition record. The car has only participated in 6 races so far, and out of those 6 races, it has taken class victories in 4 of them. So, give or take a 66% hit rate in terms of victories in its first season of competition. And it's not even finished yet. So odds are the Corvette's going to win a couple of more races before the end of 2020. So an absolutely tremendous effort by General Motors to bring a mid-engine car to production, first of all, something that they haven't done in basically 40 years, and they've never done it successfully, mind you. And then to put that brand new design, completely new territory for them, basically. Yes, there were some mid-engine prototype cars that were raced as Daytona prototypes and production concepts in terms of road cars, but never put into full-on production. That were mid-engine, and they called them Corvettes. But really, for General Motors to go into completely uncharted territory as far as they're concerned, to make a proper mid-engine European-style sports car, aiming it squarely at the McLarens and Ferraris of the world, then to put it in racing, to call it a Corvette, to associate it with the 50-plus years of history and legendary occult status that the Corvette has, and to do it successfully to the tune of a 66% win rate thus far in 2020. That is very high risk, but it has a potential of very high reward, and so far General Motors are definitely reaping the benefits of those risks. Yeah, this car is absolutely going to be a David versus Goliath story, and if you're going to call the Corvette David, you're not going to call it David for much longer. I think that the Corvette C8, both in the road car spec and in the race car spec, has the potential to be the Goliath of the new generation. However, time will tell if that is true. What have iRacing given us with the Corvette C8? Well, to go into the setup screen, what do we have here? Well, as we are used to at iRacing, we have got ourselves a menagerie of setup options. On the tires and Aero screen, here we have our single compounded tires to choose from, so they are what they are. You can adjust the tire pressure, the default value of 20.5 psi. Below that, the Aero balance calculation. That doesn't change anything on the car, but it does allow you to change some variables in here in terms of ride height and the rear wing angle, and you can see what's going on there in terms of where the Aero balance goes relative to the front end. So at 7 degrees on the rear wing there by default, we've got a 42.93% aero balance to the front. So rear bias aerodynamics as we are used to seeing in basically every Aero car. On the chassis side, though, we have got all of these adjustments, mostly for suspension, but we have some hydraulic adjustments in terms of the brake bias, as well as the brake pad material, the brake master cylinders, and, of course, our suspension. all sorts of suspension adjustments you can make in terms of anti-roll bars and the stiffness and the linkages of the anti-roll bar arrangements, your suspension geometry here in terms of the offsets of the spring perch, the spring rates, your packers, your fast and slow heave damping and rebound damping, and the camber and caster angles. All of it is here. The rear end, you've got yourselves the anti-roll bar size, the stiffness, and of course the linkages on the anti-roll bar, and then the rear wing as well on the aerodynamic side of the world. Fuel level as well. The car's maximum fuel capacity is 25.6 gallons, which is where we'll start on our first run. Up to the top here, the in-car dials. These are electronic settings for the most part. There is one hydraulic setting there in terms of the brake bias, 52% to the front there. But we do have traction control settings, TC1 and TC2. It's a little bit more sophisticated than your standard run-of-the-mill traction control. TC1 is your standard run-of-the-mill traction control. That's just concerned with wheel spin from the driven axle under acceleration. So rear-wheel drive, obviously, on this car, that's going to be able to cut the spark a little bit and control wheel spin if you start to overwhelm the traction envelope of the rear tires. It's all well and good. TC2, though, a little bit different. When the car does accelerate out of a corner, let's say that you don't necessarily exceed the overall longitudinal capacity of the tire to generate grip for you, the car still may be rotating a little bit laterally with the rear end there as the car starts to shimmy around and find the grip on the tarmac. That's what TC2 does. It controls the lateral rotation of the car as you've already passed out of the initial acceleration zone and the tires are hooking up, but if you've got a little bit more extraneous lateral rotation going on, the TC2 is going to have the ability to cut the spark, to cut the throttle, as well as to apply brakes independently to the rear axle to control that rotation so that the car doesn't over-rotate out of a corner and potentially get you into a spin. So these are tools that have been available in sports car racing for a long time now, just to give the driver a little bit of an easier time at it, because sometimes, as we'll see in the 24 Hours of Le Mans and as we have seen at the 24 Hours of Daytona, sometimes these drivers are doing multiple stints for several hours at a time. Any little bit of help that they can get to make that slightly easier is going to be welcome. Below that, we have an engine map setting. That's on step 12 of 12 for the moment. These are basically throttle maps, which control how the power is applied relative to the actual pedal angle. So step 1 is full power all the time, linear. And then as you go through steps 2 to 10, you start to get into different applications of the throttle in terms of where along the pedal travel does the power really start to come in. And step 12 is a safety car map. Below that, fuel use target setting, that is actually just an instrumentation thing. It doesn't change anything in terms of what the car does, but it gives you a fuel target on the dash, and then it'll give you a delta plus or minus whether or not you've hit that if you're above or below it. So if you're trying to find specific fuel mileage numbers, that's something you could dial in and get a better read on exactly how much fuel you're burning lap to lap. Next screen, the drivetrain screen. We've got full control over all of our forward ratios in the box, first through sixth, and our final drive ratio as well. Below that, differential in terms of where it locks up, how quickly it locks up, and basically when does the rear axle go from having a differential to being a solid axle in terms of your application of traction and of particularly slow corners. So again, rear stability very heavily linked to the differential as well on this car, particularly because we do have a lot of aerodynamic grip. So in the high-speed corners, it kind of behaves a little bit more like an open wheeler than you might think, even though this thing is a reasonably heavy tin top. Very, very cool. On the notes screen, we do have some information about the instrumentation in the car. As we've seen in a lot of tin top endurance sports cars, and even the prototypes to this point as well, the car does have a suite of indicator lights that are linked to wheel spin. So the car does not have anti-lock brakes. Obviously the road car would, but the race car, no, these guys are too good for that. But to aid the driver in determining if they are starting to overstep the traction envelope of the tires, particularly under braking, the car does have a set of indicator lights to give the driver a little bit of warning if the car detects too much of a discrepancy in wheel speed from one side to the other, front to rear, as well as laterally. It'll bring up a light on the dash. The driver will know, hey, perhaps I need to back off the brakes a little bit, or I need to unwind the steering a little bit because I'm starting to overwhelm the tires. And of course, as the car evolves over a run, as the tires start to wear, as the brakes start to wear as well, it'll give the driver a very good barometer of where the limit of grip is. And all of that, of course, is very welcome to make these guys' lives a little bit easier. You also have a set of complementary lights for the rear axle. in terms of not necessarily only lockups, but in terms of traction as well. The lights will come on to show you if the traction control is doing something. It'll also go to show you if you've got some wheel spin at the back. I imagine that's particularly useful at night or in wet conditions where you might not be able to get as many visual cues or even feedback cues through either the steering or through the seat of the pants, particularly if it is wet. What's standing water and what's actual wheel spin can be difficult to tell sometimes. The lights will give the driver a little bit more of a visual cue in addition to all the sensory information that they get from the ECU in their heads. Beyond all that, though, we do have launch control on the car. It's automatically activated when you're in the pit lane with the pit limiter on. Bring the clutch in, dump the throttle first gear, and then dump the clutch out. The car will find the limit of grip, and it will go up to the pit lane speed limit. All of that's disengaged when you turn off the pit lane speed limiter. Beyond all that, though, we've got a full tank in this car, and we have got the Belle Isle circuit to ourselves. In the cockpit, what do we have? Well, we'll turn everything on. And we see, as the dash comes to life, we've got a whole bunch of instrumentation. Obviously, the big green N in the middle, that is our gear position indicator. If we go up through the gearbox, you'll see that goes up all the way through the gears, quick as you like, up into 6th, and then it comes back down, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, neutral, reverse, and then back into neutral. In the upper left of the display, you can see that we have tire pressures. That's measuring in pounds per square inch, so 20.5 psi all around. Below that, to the left, we have got ourselves our surface temperature of the tires. That's reading in degrees Fahrenheit, so 113 degrees Fahrenheit right now. Below that, we have got brake bias. You see the 52.0. That's your brake bias relative to the front. I can ramp up and down through the brake bias. You can see it's hit 53, and then go back down to 52.5, to 52.1, and then back to 52. Below that, across the bottom, we have got our engine map setting. So it's showing step 12 right now. I can go all the way up to step 1 if I want, which is full power, all the way back down to step 12, which is our safety car map. To the right of that, the green mix switch, not switch, but the mix thing right there, the mix window, the green one. Mix 1, that's your fuel mixture setting. To the right of that, you've got the blue TC1 icon that's showing step 2, and then to the right of that, the silver TC2 icon showing in step 2. Toward the middle of the display, to the top, you see the white 0. That is our engine RPM measured from the crankshaft. So 0 right now as the engine is not running. Below that, you've got the yellow numbers across the center of the display, where it says 40:00 and then 00:01:00. That is going to show us our last lap time and then our current lap delta relative to our last lap time. In the upper right of the right-hand side of the display, we have got ourselves our speed readout in miles per hour here, reading 0 right now. And then we have got ourselves our fuel delta numbers below all of that. Very cool. And then the other indicators to the lower right of the display, those are climate control settings, believe it or not. These cars have air conditioning. That's something in the regulations. They don't want the drivers to be getting too hot in the cockpit, particularly because they might be driving these things for hours at a time in all sorts of different weather conditions. So some creature comforts in here for the drivers these days. As for the steering wheel, yep, it's a butterfly-style steering wheel, not at all dissimilar from what you might find in a lot of open-wheeled cars. And superficially, I find that this resembles the steering wheel that Red Bull used to use in Formula One, going from about 2007, 2008, all the way through the mid-2010s. So interesting to see there with a whole complement of buttons and switches on there as well. We've got Belle Isle to ourselves. We've got a Corvette C8.R GTE to ourselves. What does this thing do? Let's fire it up. So the engine is up. We're at our low idle speed of 2,034 RPM. As you can see there, if we bring the fuel mix all the way up to the top, you can see that the idle speed goes up to 2117. But back to our safety car map, settles back down to 2035, 2034 thereabout. Also in this car, we have full control of the clutch. Not every car in iRacing allows you to do this. It's a holdover for when iRacing didn't really have great clutch physics. That's something that's been added later to the sim in the last year or so, but not every car has been retrofitted with the new clutch physics. So, this one being a new release for iRacing, they have got all of that into the control algorithm. So we do have full control of the clutch, and you can even see that when we completely disengage the clutch, the revs go up a little bit to 2052. Bring the loading back in there through the output shaft. It puts a little bit of a load on the engine there to 2035, 2034. But Clutch is very grabby. You don't use it once you are out on track at speed. It's a semi-automatic change, so up and down, no blipping of the throttle, nothing like that is necessary. You don't have to lift on the upshifts either, but you do use the clutch when you're stopping and starting. So, yeah, it's a very grabby clutch. We might stall it out of the pits. Hope not, but you can. Last bit in terms of your controls in here. Pit lane, speed limiter, and you can see the green lights that start flashing across the sides of the display once that is active. Additionally, once we are at speed, you'll see the shift lights across the top of the display in the upper section of the bezel. The obviously give you a little bit of a visual cue in terms of when you're going to start hitting the red line. Clutch in. First gear. We'll raise the revs a bit. We'll try not to stall it. And we are out of the pit lane. Turn off the limiter. And we'll just start to bring everything up to temperature. You'll be able to see in real time along the left-hand side of the display what the tire pressures and the surface temperatures of the tires are doing. Jump onto the brakes. Start to bring a little bit of temperature into them. You can hear the brakes are squealing as they're still a bit cold. That'll start to diminish as we get more temperature into them. Get some heat into the front axle through here. A tight corner through the little side straight as we approach the end of the lap. Through the final corner, let's bring our engine map up to full beans. There's full revs. 7,000 RPM is all she wrote. Generally, you shift at about 6750. Has brushed the wall there, I do believe. It was the sweetest of kisses, though. Still don't have a lot of heat in the brakes yet. Still don't have a lot of heat in the front tires either, and we are full of fuel, remember. And you can start to see the lights for the wheel speeds there in terms of when we're approaching lockup, as well as when the traction control is doing something. You see them scrolling up and down on the sides of the main display. A 30.522 as our first lap. Remember, full of fuel, lots of understeer there through turn 2. Now that we do have good temperature in the front and rear axles, the brakes are where we want them, tires are where we want them. What is the balance like? Well, full of fuel right now, it's heavy. It's noticeably heavy. However, in terms of the overall poise on this thing, and of course the performance just gets better as the fuel load burns down, The turn-in is fantastic at medium and low speed. You just throw it in and it grips like you won't believe. A lot of mid-engine cars have mid-corner understeer, and of course that is the case with this one as well, but it has a ton of grip initially off of the turn-in. It just bites. And it's not just a high-speed grip thing either. It has wonderful grip at medium and low speed, so mechanically that front axle is working tremendously well with the tire grip available.
1 minute 29.344.
Trail braking here through turns 1 and 2 to keep the nose in, because of course the tires are working overtime through there. Medium to high speed, long corners, but it's very planted. It has a lot of poise. And as you can see there, if you do get it over the curbs a little bit too enthusiastically, it'll bounce into the air, but it doesn't really do anything too unsettling. Nothing that you can't recover from reasonably quickly. The response to all of the inputs is very direct. It's very obviously responsive, but it's very predictable as well. It doesn't do too many things that are surprising other than work very well, which, coming from perhaps some older style tin tops, is something that is going to be a surprise, but a surprise in a very good way. It just works very, very well. A little bit of a four-wheel drift getting set in there through that long left-hander. But the car just responds as you would expect. It's very composed. It's very good over the bumps. Obviously, Belle Isle's a very bumpy street circuit. Not really a place you'd see a car like this running. But the car handles everything very nicely. That mid-corner understeer there, of course, that just happens in whatever car you're in through that corner. It's a very difficult one. You can see how deep you can go on the brakes with full pedal force there. It just grips. No ABS, of course, but it has a lot of performance to give. A little bit of cadence braking is necessary as the speed really comes down. That's true in basically any car that doesn't have ABS, and even cars that do, because using full braking force all the way to your turn-in point is not really the best way to do things. Engine power, it's really enough. Again, rated at about 500 horsepower. Definitely the engine is capable of more, and that's where the regulations put it at the moment. We'll see what happens in the future with that regard.
1 minute 28.074.
Rear end starting to want to step out there. The computer helping us out. The gearbox is really, really peachy. I like it. Really quick up and down. No dramas. You can hear the rear axle as it's hunting around for the grip with the traction control doing its thing. And of course the tires starting to hook up. It's absolutely wonderful. Even first gear getting hard back into the throttle. That traction control algorithm is fantastic. A little bit oversteer there, even with the TC, but you can catch it. The car's not trying to kill you. It really wants to work with you, and in fact the car wants to work more than you sometimes, which is really good. We kiss the wall again. Little Juan Pablo Montoya action going on.
1 minute 29.264.
But with the composure and just general stability of this thing, you can put it exactly where you want it. Doesn't really complain too much. And it basically just wants to follow your commands exactly as issued. Really does a fantastic job of translating your intentions into reality. Really fantastic. There you go. We made up a lot of time there in the last sector.
1 minute 27.722.
127.722. I think that was our best lap of the session so far. See what the tire pressures and tire temperatures are doing. All that being updated in real time, of course. A bit of a slide there on turn in, but the car just absolutely responds perfectly. Second gear through here on the throttle earlier. It's my mistake, unwound the steering a little bit too soon. Dive into the pits. And that's all well and good. Yeah, again, a full fuel run right there. Not bad at all, if I do say so myself. Again, that best lap time so far, 127.722. So that's good. And again, full of fuel. That's not too far off of what I'm able to do on low tanks. So that's pretty good, I will say, on full tanks. And of course, just one set of tires. They got a little bit beat up in terms of us tagging the wall a little bit and some lockups and some wheel spin, but really not bad at all on full tanks. And again, it's just so poised. It turns in wonderfully. That was the first thing that I noticed getting into this car for the first time. It turns in so sharply, and it has so much bite, and it doesn't really let go of that bite either. It's just absolutely splendidly composed, particularly across the front axle. I happen to be somebody who really likes the front axle. I like it to be very positive. I like a pointy car, basically. I will try to get rid of understeer in a setup to the point where I will accept big moments of oversteer, because I'm more comfortable dealing with oversteer than I am with my overall comfort level of annoyance with understeer. So this car is absolutely built for that sort of a style, at least on default setup. Of course, you can play with this to your heart's content to see what it'll really do if you really want to fine-tune it to something that you particularly want. But from where I'm sitting already, this is very much of a complexion that I can really, really get behind. Right, so we'll take some fuel out of this car now. We've got just over 10 gallons on board. We'll burn off a little bit of that surplus on the outlap, of course. New set of tires. We'll see what sort of lap time delta we can get relative to the basically full fuel load that we had. 127.722 to beat. We'll see what the overall gain is on low fuel. And how does the balance change? What other things need to change? We haven't done anything else with the setup here other than take some gas out. So then, let the dash get happy. Our pedals calibrated, and we go running. Fit limiter on, first gear punched up. And we didn't stall it, hooray! Out of the pits, off the limiter. Let's try and get some heat up in the tires here. We had a little bit of a warm-up issue going out on the last run. Because the tires weren't really there as quickly as I wanted. We tagged the wall lightly a couple of times. We'll try to fix that issue presently. Trying to be a little bit more aggressive on the brakes into the big stops. Get up to mix one. Big stop from about 150. That'll get the brakes working good. This section here will get the tires working pretty good. Or not. As you can see, we stalled it. It has traction control, but again, warm-up issues. Okay. As I was saying, yeah, you gotta watch out. I mean, there's a bumpy circuit, not used all that often, so it's, you know, not really worn in on the racing line per se. All that tire temperature that we had started to build up has fallen away. Let's just start to go for it anyway on light tanks. Lots of understeer on the cold tires across the front axle. Kind of fight with it. More understeer. Next lap will be quicker for sure. First gear through here, clip the apex on the throttle. Having to wait a bit. Rear axle still not quite where I want it temperature-wise. Up on the brakes. A little bit wide of the apex here. Still not 100% trusting the front end. It's a little bit understeer. Front's grabbing a little bit under braking, made the car twitch over to the right. Short shift into third. Rear axle braking free a bit. But there we go. Ideally, you want the fronts to be over 100 degrees always. And in the corners, obviously, they'll jump up into the 130s under normal load. If you really start to push the tires, they'll get up into 140, 150 range. 127.854. So we're still below our previous session best. As in, we haven't exceeded it yet. All right, starting to gain time back now. Tires are more or less happy. Brakes are really happy. Rear axle is a little bit skatey with not as much weight back there. Under brakes, pulling under braking's gotten a little bit better into the big stop there. First gear, throw it in, try to get on the power early. There we go, we're negative again. Feathering the brake all the way through the long left-hander. Very tight first gear. 90-degree corner through the side straight here, coming into the end of the lap. Second gear, throw it in a little early, counter steer a little bit with the slide on the throttle. Right at mid-corner. Watch the wall on the exit. Minus half a second so far. 26 and change.
1 minute, 27.3.
27.256. Got to watch that apex curb in turn 2. It'll bounce the car in the air and then you lose all your front end. Turn it in. Back end trying to overtake the front end there for a moment. Right in, watch the barrier, a little bit of a frame drop there. Negative again, good. And you can see the wheel spin lights flashing into the blue a little bit, accelerating down the straight. Again, lots of bumps. The tires do leave the ground momentarily at times, even in a straight line, so you do have to be gentle with your steering inputs, even on a straight. In the corners, though, once the weight bias transfers from the rear to the front, because again, a lot of rear bias in this car because it's mid-engine. Of course, it's ballasted out to the extent that the regulations allow, but that dynamic weight transfer is really what you use in any race car, really. And in this car, the brakes are really your friend in keeping that weight over the nose, making the front tires purchase the tarmac a bit better. There we go, up a quarter already. On the brakes at about 450 feet. Up in the air over the apex. Picking up a little bit of dirt. Brakes. A little bit of a lock up on the left front, that's okay. On the throttle hard. Gotta watch the barriers through here. No warning before you get into them. On the brakes. Just try to keep the wheel straight as possible when you jump on the brakes from high speed. Otherwise, one wheel will lock momentarily and the car will turn off in that direction with the imbalanced traction. Down in the first gear, get it stop, get it turn, on the power, let the traction control sort out the rear end. That turn in was a bit messy, but on the throttle hard to the exit.
One minute, 27.5.
27.506. Middle sector is where we're losing time. Jumping on the brakes a fraction later that time around. Gave away a bit of time bouncing into the air, but I don't care because it's fun. Try first gear into here. Get a lot more purchase out of the tarmac there in that low speed right-hander. And it launches you down the back straight here, as it were. First gear through here. Helps the nose get in a little bit more. Still giving up time in the final corner.
1 minute 27.329.
Yeah, back in. Getting out a little bit through the turn in there. Can use that momentum of the slide to help the nose come in, provided that you're catching the slide when you get back on the throttle. Let's keep it in second through here. Brake a little bit later if you use second gear through there because you get more engine braking as you come off of the throttle. Man, that wall just kept getting closer. The nose was bouncing in the air. There was no room if you get that a little bit wrong.
Minute 27.394.
Trail braking all the time through turns 1 and 2, keeping the nose in. That's full braking force for so long. You can go so deep. And the wheels just won't really lock if you keep the steering straight. Once you start to get cross weight dialed in, though, it'll start to lock them up as the weight transfers over from the inside to outside. Brakes. First gear, turn it in, get on the throttle, there we go. Second gear, hold second. Come down to about half, quarter throttle, using the brakes as trail braking, then we get it stopped. Full throttle. There we go, almost 3/4 of a second up. Let's not give it all away right now, please. There we are. That's how we do it. That's a session best. 26.577. That's a second up on our previous time. Good. Lots of understeer through 2 there. See the front tires gotten real hot. A little bit wide. No problem. Actually, the left side tires might appreciate that little run through the grass. Pull them down slightly. That's good. So for a low fuel sort of quali sim situation, this is what it'll do. Very communicative, very responsive, a little bit twitchy, but for the most part does pretty much exactly what you want, pretty much exactly what you need. Do be ready to catch the rear end on occasion, but I mean, really that's just what happens when you push a car hard. Something will let go eventually.
1 minute 28.255.
Then a trail brake, feathering the throttle. Nope, 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 nope. I'm not going to do it. Not going to do what the pace car driver did in 2018. No, sir. Let's cool the tires down for the rest of this lap. Just a little bit of a cool down. Of course, the tire temperatures don't fall away all that much. Number one, because this is still a very tight racetrack, and number two, the brakes are blazing hot right now. The brake temperature is going to be soaked up through the wheel and into the tire. It's fantastic. Fantastic. What a glorious little car.
1 minute 27.718.
What an absolute surprise. I mean, I think we all knew that the mid-engine Corvette, if we ever got it, was going to be a really awesome machine. But now that it's here, and now that we can play with it in sim racing, holy God, this is good. This is real good. Brakes are hot. They are fading a little bit. Only not a whole lot we could do from a setup standpoint to help the brakes out. We just gotta use them less. Of course, this wouldn't be a problem in most races that this car would partake in, because you're not going flat out the whole time. You're going to be saving fuel at times. You're going to be tucking into slipstreams and then ducking back out into the air for big braking zones, so you get more downforce to help you. Not every lap is a qualifying lap in reality. Brakes. And they're still working just fine, the brakes. They're just, the initial bite is a bit less than it had been at the beginning of the run, and I think that's just par for the course, really. But just be mindful of that. The brake temperature curves are modeled, and you do notice it. But As you can see, the thing just eggs you on. It just wants you to keep going. Even though we've knocked most of the new out of the tires and we've got 5 laps of fuel left on board now, it still feels good. It feels very stable. Little bits of understeer, punctuated by little bits of oversteer.
1 minute, 29.0.
But the gearbox is peachy. The engine, very, very linear with its power delivery. Doesn't rev super quickly. And it doesn't rev super high either. But it's got lots of power through the entirety of its rev range. It's got great torque. Basically any gear you're in, there's going to be some get up and go in it. And again, 5.5 liters displacement, so there is a pretty substantial engine braking effect to be had as well when you come off of the throttle. So all that's quite welcome. Any little bit of extra help to get this thing slowed down is welcome. Oh, it's a beautiful thing. It just wants me to keep going and going and going, and I would quite happily do so all night long, but I don't think that would really make for an engaging experience for all of you. All 7 of you who are still watching at this point, and maybe 7's a little bit optimistic on my end. Low fuel, caution and warning noted. Yep, the rear tire temperatures there got up to 170 degrees. Brakes. But even now with the tires starting to wear in, the temperatures are up, front end grip is real good. Sign of a fundamentally well-sorted chassis. That was not a fundamentally well-sorted line through the penultimate quarter. But we got there in the end.
1 minute, 29.029.
Ah, yep, sliding the whole way around turn 2. Brakes. First gear, apex, there we go, hard on the throttle. Very squirrely over those bumps under braking. That's fantastic. A low fuel caution warning has gone away. Not quite sure why, because we didn't magically get more gas in the tank. Is it affected by fuel slush? I don't think so. Wouldn't think that that would really be a problem in a modern car. All these tanks are cells with these fuel bladders in them, basically Kevlar bags that carry the fuel. Not bad. All right, so to still be within, 4/10 of your session best later on in a run, after really pushing it hard the whole time, I'll take it. Definitely later on in a run, the car really starts to come into its own. Definitely, it's not a sprint sort of thing. It likes to have, I don't know, how many laps have we done on this run? About 10, 15, something like that. It likes to have a little while to acclimate itself to the running conditions, and you start to get more and more keyed in as the run goes on, and just everything starts to really come up into a wonderful sense of maturity. Understood, 1 lap, we're pitting this time. There we are. Now watch the tire temperatures there. They'll continue to go up, not because the tires will be getting worked anymore, as we're stopping, but the tire temperatures will continue to go up for a time because of the brake temperatures. Of course, the brakes are stupid hot right about now. We'll kill the engine and turn the ignition back on, and just watch the instrumentation for a moment. You see, look, already we've been stopped for about 10 seconds, and the tire temperatures now starting to get up into the 180s. And that is simply the effect of the brake temperatures, because the brakes are really blazing hot, flared up all the way to their peak operating temperature. And there's not much air now going through the brake system, certainly no air being driven through the brake system to cool them down. So all that heat has to go someplace, and it's going to be radiating its way into the wheel hub, into the wheel proper, and then obviously that'll be heating the air convectively. Well, the air itself will be heated conductively, and then the convection inside the tire is going to start to heat the inner surface of the tire and then the sidewall, and then that heat radiates to the outer surfaces and the tread block and all that stuff. Yeah, lots of thermodynamics going on, but it's really cool that you can actually observe the effects of brake temperature on the tire temperature. So that is absolutely spot on. If you've ever worked on a car right after it's come off of the road, and even if you're not driving it hard or whatever, but obviously you use the brakes, heat gets into it. If you ever touch the tire or go to pull the wheel off, you realize, hey, this thing's hot. It's hotter than it was when you were driving for sure. That's what's happening, and iRacing is modeling that, and it's really cool to watch it in real time. And of course, you can see the effect pretty much proportionally on the tire pressures. You can see that we've got 24.7 and 24.3 psi on the front tires, respectively, left to right. And you can see that the left front is at 181 degrees, and we've got 24.7 psi. The right front is at 173 degrees, and we've got 24.3 psi. So you can see that the pressure is different dependent on the tire temperature, which is absolutely authentic. As air expands, it heats up as it expands. As air compresses, it actually gets hotter as well. So some of the tire temperature actually comes from the tire physically being compressed by the loadings that go in through it, and of course that's compressing the air inside the tire as well. So different factors of tire heating going on, but that's absolutely awesome. Absolutely awesome to see stuff like that. That is super cool. Definitely can't get enough of that. Thank you, iRacing. That's fantastic. This is a fantastic race car. It's a fantastic addition to iRacing. We've needed a mid-engine Corvette in the world ever since the Corvette became a proper sports car, again, in the 60s, is when I would argue that happened. And now we've got a mid-engine Corvette in the real world. We've got a mid-engine Corvette on the racetrack, and we've got a mid-engine Corvette in iRacing, the GTE class. These are fantastic cars. A lot of series around the world use the GTE or equivalent class cars for endurance racing. It's fantastic. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. I don't have a single bad thing to say about this car, other than it took way too long for us to get a mid-engine production Corvette in the world. But now we have it. Awesome. My love for the Pontiac Fiero as GM's last production mid-engine car. Well, yep, Corvette, take your rightful place at the top of the hierarchy of great American sports cars once again, because there it is. And again, I think the Corvette, with its sights firmly set on Ferrari and McLaren in terms of mid-engine sports cars and mid-engine race cars, tin tops anyway, yep, absolutely. I think we're going to have a new king in town before too much longer. Whew. Awesome. Fantastic car. If you don't have it for iRacing, it's $12 on the iRacing client, as are pretty much all new cars in iRacing. I think it's $12 or $11.95 technically for all of them at full price. Of course, if you own many, many pieces of content, you do get a little bit of a discount for every next thing you buy. But yeah, you need this car, and you need it right now. So stop watching this video because it's over anyway. And yeah, go buy this car, go drive this car, and go love this car, because I do, and I think you will as well. Until next time, though, that's all I have got for us here from Belle Isle with the Corvette C8.R GTE. The only thing left to do is hot laps coming to you from external as well as onboard replay views from here at Belle Isle. Until next time, though, I do thank you all very, very much for watching. Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you very much, and stay tuned for the hot laps. And of course, we will see you soon.